You have probably tried growing onions before, only to end up with tiny bulbs the size of marbles or a mushy mess that rotted before you ever got to harvest. That frustration is incredibly common, and 9 times out of 10, it comes down to a handful of mistakes that are easy to fix once you know what they are. Today, I am going to walk you through exactly how to grow a massive crop of onions in a single container, from preparing your soil all the way through harvesting and curing. And if you stick around until the end, I have got a seed-saving trick that can keep you growing onions year after year without ever buying seeds again. Let us get into it. Growing your own onions means crisp, fresh bulbs, straight from the garden to your kitchen, no chemicals, no mystery storage treatments, and a flavor that store-bought onions simply cannot match. Once you nail this process, it pays off every single season. We are going to cover container setup, planting timing, variety selection, a dense planting method that multiplies your harvest, and exact deeper just wastes soil and adds weight you do not need. Drainage is the single biggest factor separating a great onion harvest from a rotten one. If your container does not have drainage holes, drill at least 4 or 5 in the bottom, each about ½ an inch wide. Onions sitting in waterlogged soil turn to mush from the inside out, and by the time you notice the damage, the whole crop can be lost. Raised containers have a natural advantage here. Water moves through and out, instead of pooling around the bulbs, which is especially critical if you garden in a humid climate where summer rain can be relentless. For soil, think fertile and free draining. A good quality potting mix combined with about 25% compost gives you the right balance of nutrients and structure. Avoid heavy garden soil straight from the ground. It compacts in containers, chokes drainage, and creates exactly the soggy conditions onions cannot tolerate. A generous layer of compost on top works well too, and if you do not make your own, those bagged mixes that include a small amount of slow-release fertilizer are perfectly fine during the growing season. Mulch deserves attention too. A thin layer of straw or fine bark over the soil surface cuts down on weeds dramatically. Weeding between tightly spaced onion plants is tedious work, and weeds compete aggressively for the same shallow root zone onions occupy. Mulch also holds moisture more evenly, which means less watering and more consistent growth. 2 inches of mulch is plenty. More than that, and you risk burying the emerging shoots. The right container and soil mean nothing if you plant at the wrong time of year. Onion growth is driven by daylight hours more than almost any other vegetable, and getting the timing wrong leads to bolting, undersized bulbs, or outright failure. In warmer climates, zones 8 through 10, fall planting produces the best results. Sow seeds or set out transplants in late autumn, let them establish through the cooler winter months, and harvest in late spring before summer humidity and heavy rains move in. Humidity is an onion killer. It promotes rot, encourages fungal disease, and pushes plants to bolt prematurely. Growing through the dry season sidesteps all of that. Cooler climates, zones 3 through 7, follow the opposite pattern. Early spring planting, as soon as the soil can be worked, gives onions the long, gradually lengthening days they need to form bulbs. Harvest comes in late summer or early fall. A soil thermometer takes the guesswork out of spring timing. 40 degrees Fahrenheit is the minimum for onion seeds to germinate, but 55 to 65 degrees produces much faster, more uniform sprouting. If you are starting from seed directly in the container, sow generously. Onion seed germination rates are unpredictable, especially with older seed. Scatter more than you think you need. Cover lightly with about a quarter inch of soil and keep the surface consistently moist until sprouts appear. Thin later by harvesting the extras as green onions rather than pulling and discarding them. Every seedling you remove early becomes something you can eat. Choosing the right variety is where a lot of container growers go wrong without even realizing it. Onion varieties fall into 3 categories based on the day length they need to trigger bulb formation. Long-day varieties need 14 to 16 hours of daylight and perform best in northern states. Short-day varieties bulb with just 10 to 12 hours and thrive in the south. Intermediate or day-neutral types fall in between and offer the most flexibility, especially for container growers in zones 6 through 8. Planting a long-day variety in a southern garden means those bulbs may never size up properly. The plant keeps producing leaves, waiting for daylight hours that never arrive, and eventually bolts or just stalls out. Matching variety to latitude is not optional. It is the difference between a container full of beautiful bulbs and a container full of disappointment. For short season or warmer climates, fast-maturing varieties are the safest bet. Types like Texas, Early Grana, or Red Creole bulk up quickly during shorter daylight windows. In northern areas, varieties like Copra or Patterson take advantage of those long summer days and also happen to be excellent keepers, lasting months in storage after curing. That said, gardening rules are made to be tested. Experimenting with varieties outside their recommended zone can produce surprisingly good results. Growing a long-day onion in a short-day region might not give you prize-winning bulbs, but you can still end up with a perfectly usable harvest. The worst outcome is learning something about how your particular microclimate behaves. Try a small batch of something unconventional alongside your reliable varieties. You might be pleasantly surprised. Do not overlook the alternatives either. If full-sized bulbing onions prove difficult in your climate, shallots grow in clusters and multiply on their own, giving you a generous harvest from a small planting. Spring onions and bunching types like Evergreen Hardy White produce all season long without needing specific day lengths at all. Egyptian walking onions are practically indestructible in warm climates and keep producing year after year once established. Dense planting in containers might sound like a mistake, and conventional advice says to space onions 6 to 8 inches apart for maximum bulb size. In a container, that math leaves you with maybe 6 or 8 onions total. Not exactly a huge harvest. Tightening the spacing to 3 to 4 inches between plants changes everything. You fit dramatically more onions into the same container, the dense leaf canopy shades out weeds naturally, and you start harvesting earlier because thinning becomes part of the process. Pull every other onion at the immature stage, use them fresh as green onions or cooking onions, and the remaining plants suddenly have room to expand into full-sized bulbs. Crowd growing does mean slightly smaller individual bulbs compared to wide spacing and open ground. That is the trade-off. But total yield per container goes up significantly, and the staggered harvesting means you are eating fresh onions for weeks or even months instead of waiting for one single harvest day. For a home kitchen, a steady supply of medium onions beats a one-time haul of jumbos almost every time. If this kind of practical growing advice is useful to you, subscribing means you will not miss the next one. I put out new growing guides regularly. Back to our onions. Knowing when to harvest separates a good crop from a great one. Onions send clear signals when they are ready, and learning to read those signals means pulling bulbs at peak quality every time. The most reliable indicator is the tops. As onions reach maturity, the green foliage begins to yellow, soften, and fold over on its own. This is not disease. It is the plant redirecting all its remaining energy into the bulb. Once about half the tops in your container have fallen over naturally, the crop is ready. Do not bend or break the tops yourself. That old advice actually damages the neck of the onion and invites rot during storage. Harvest timing depends on what you plan to do with the onions. For immediate use in the kitchen, pull them any time. Immature onions with green tops still attached are fantastic for cooking, mild and tender with a sweetness that fully mature bulbs lose. Early harvesting also serves as thinning, giving neighboring plants more room to develop. For long-term storage, patience matters. Wait until the tops have dried down naturally, then gently lift the bulbs from the soil. Avoid yanking them out by the stems. A hand trowel slid underneath loosens the roots without bruising the bulb. Bruised onions rot in storage. Handle them like eggs for the first few days. Curing is the step most homegrowers skip, and it makes an enormous difference in how long your onions last. Spread the harvested bulbs in a single layer somewhere warm, dry, and well ventilated. A covered porch, a garage, with good airflow, or a wire rack in the sun all work. 3 to 4 days of curing in warm conditions lets the outer skins dry and tighten, the neck seals shut, and the onion essentially locks in its moisture. After curing, trim the roots and cut the tops down to about an inch above the bulb. Stored in a cool, dry spot with good air circulation, properly cured onions last 3 to 6 months depending on the variety. Long day types generally store the longest. Some of the tops in your container will send up a flower stalk instead of falling over. That is bolting, and it happens most often with the largest bulbs or when the plant experiences temperature stress. Bolted onions are still perfectly edible, but they will not store well. Use them first and save the non-bolted ones for the pantry. Leave 1 or 2 flower stalks to mature fully if you want to collect seed for next season. Yellow leaves with green veins showing up well before maturity usually point to a nitrogen deficiency. So, light dose of fish emulsion or balanced liquid fertilizer corrects this within a couple of weeks without overfeeding the plant. Pale, stunted growth across the whole container suggests the soil mix was too lean from the start. Mushy bulbs pulled from the soil almost always trace back to overwatering or poor drainage. If the soil stays wet for more than a day after watering, the frequency needs to drop, or the soil mix needs more perlite or coarse sand to improve drainage. Container onions in humid climates are especially vulnerable. Water when the top inch of soil feels dry, not on a fixed schedule. Tiny bulbs at harvest time, despite healthy green growth, usually mean a day-length mismatch. The plant produced plenty of foliage but never received the light trigger it needed to start bulbing. Check whether your variety matches your latitude and planting season. Swapping to an intermediate or day-neutral variety often solves this completely. Onions that taste unusually bitter or overly pungent were probably stressed by inconsistent watering. Alternating between bone-dry and soaking wet concentrates the sulfur compounds that create sharpness. Even moderate moisture throughout the growing season produces milder, sweeter. 2 of your onions bolt and send up those tall flower stalks. Let them go. Do not cut them. The round flower head at the top, called an umbel, contains hundreds of tiny black seeds. Once the umbel dries and the seeds inside turn fully black, snip the whole head off and drop it into a paper bag. Shake gently and the seeds fall right out. Stored in a cool, dry place, onion seeds stay viable for about 2 years, sometimes 3. That single flower head can produce enough seed to fill your container several times over the following season. Free seed, perfectly adapted to your exact growing conditions, from onions you already know perform well in your climate. Commercial growers have used this method for generations, and it works just as well in a single container on a back patio. That covers everything you need to grow a huge crop of onions in one container. If this helped you out, I would really appreciate a subscribe and a tap on that bell icon so you catch the next guide. Got questions or your own container onion tips? Drop them in the comments. Thanks for watching, and happy growing.